Welcome back. And the final part of the project lifecycle is what we call project closing. And this section will deal with chapter 9, which you'll find on pages 305 to 313. And we'll talk through, at the end of this, you should know the different actions that need to happen during the process of closing the project, your post-project evaluation process, your organizing and archiving of your different project documents, and also situations that can result in early project termination, and also some of the critical success factors in project planning and the project closing process. As I mentioned, that the project closing is one of the most important parts of the entire project lifecycle. Every part of it is important. The project closing, however, is about sustainability. Project closing is about how do we encapsulate all of the things that we've learned over the course of the project and over the course of creating and running this project, because in there lies what we call institutional knowledge and experience, because that is going to generate income on the next project. Because by the time you've put together a proposal for the next project, you'll be able to illustrate to your client what the next part is and how well you can run a project. So some of the actions is collecting the final payments, recognizing and evaluating staff, especially if you've been using contractors, conduct post-evaluation, project evaluation internally and externally, document all the lessons learned, and archive your documents. So final payments on page 305, final payments from the customer. Generally, depending on how your contract was structured, if your contract was structured as a phased contract, or as a contract that is a cost plus contract, meaning that you give all of your invoices the client pays for it, and right at the end of it they pay you 10%. This is quite important process. And also payments to others. Those are all the contractors that you've used that you need to pay, and suppliers, and then performing a financial analysis of the project and doing what we call your ROI. And if you did not account for all of your costs, if you don't know all of the different costs that went into running the project, then it's going to be very difficult to know whether you've made a profit from the project or not. The money that is left over in the account is not the profit. The money left over is the money that is left over. If you have planned to make a certain amount or planned a certain return on investment, then that is what should be left. And if you don't account for all the cost, then you won't know what is the right amount that should be left. This is also the point in which you evaluate staff and also contractors, in which you also recognize staff that have done very well, and which you celebrate for those that have done exceptionally well, because again, a project, depending on the type of project, projects tend to be, doesn't matter which type, however, doesn't matter which type, it is extremely stressful. Most times you work under extremely tight deadlines. You have to constantly be aware of what, not just what you're doing, but if your task and your activity is dependent on somebody else's task, then the stress of waiting for them to complete their portion of it so that you can take it over is quite stressful. And that's an important element of it, is that it is not just the activities that need to be done and completed, but it's the sheer stress and the deadlines that project members work under. And at this point, you need to recognize that and celebrate the good work that some have done, and pull aside others that might not have done so well, and talk through them and understand what the lessons they've learned and how they can do better the next time. You must do individual performance evaluations. You must identify areas where they need further development, and you must share during individual meetings or give to their supervisor that growth. Post-project evaluation, you can have a look on figure 9.2. There's an agenda for meeting. Review the post-project performance, identify improvements, hold individual meetings, hold a project team meeting, and then prepare your final report and lessons learned with recommendations. Lessons learned on page 309. What are these lessons learned element of it? It's a purpose of identifying and documenting all of the things that you've learned through running the process, because again, as I said earlier, that develops what we call institutional knowledge. It is knowledge and wisdom and experience that is embedded not just in documents but in people. Now, the most important thing is you need to get it out of the people and onto a document, because therein lies your intellectual property. If that person leaves the company, they leave with all of that knowledge and experience with them. If you don't draw out that knowledge and experience, everything that they've learned through running the project, everything that they've developed, all the systems that they've put in place in order for the project to run smoothly, if you don't draw that out of them and document them, then they leave with that knowledge and you won't be able to pick up where they left off. And that is why it's so important that you build this, what we call a knowledge base or a repository of all of the combined experience of all the project members, so that you can easily access it and be able to draw on it on the next project that you're running. You also must, through the entire project, keep record of everything. Capture every single meeting. All of the meeting minutes need to be up to date. Have an agenda for every single meeting and have meeting minutes. When you have training sessions, make sure that all of that is minuted. When you have meetings with clients and stakeholders, make sure that those meetings are minuted, so that there's a record, a full, complete record of the entire project. You need to archive those documents, organize, file, and archive them. As I said, it's about that repository of information that you keep and that you draw out of people, so that you have that IP or intellectual property sitting in documents and notes rather than inside of people's heads. You must have a very good system so you'll be able to retrieve it very quickly, and you must spend time going through it, because somebody must go through it. It mustn't just go into a drawer somewhere and forgetting about it. You must work through it so that next time when you do a similar project, you can then draw on that experience. Because if you run the same project maybe 3 or 4 or 5 times, every time you'll get better at it. How do you know you get better at it? Because every time you review it and every time you compare your performance against the previous one. And that is how you get better. If you cannot measure it, you cannot see it. And if you cannot see it, you cannot measure it. And that's the important element of this closing a process of a project. Another important part is customer feedback. And this is one of the most important elements of archiving those lessons and working through some of the feedback. And maybe not just the customer, but all of the stakeholders. Because remember, your closing meeting, you will have a lot more stakeholders in that final meeting. Your post-project evaluation with the customer, determine the expected benefits. Did we meet the expected benefits? Yes or no? Assess the level of satisfaction. Are you satisfied with the project that we delivered? Ask open-ended questions. Don't ask yes or no questions. Ask open-ended questions. The project that we delivered, is it what you expected it to be? Say yes. What about it is met your expectation? Or if it did not meet your expectation, what about it did not meet your expectation? So you can draw out some information from that discussion. The participants in the customer feedback would be key team members, customer representatives, and most importantly, the project manager. Here's an example in figure 9.3. You'll see an example of a post-project customer evaluation survey. You can go and have a look. Please ask the customer first. And also, if your project was delivered at 100% of what the client wanted and met their expectation and maybe even exceeded it, ask them for a reference. Ask them to be able to reference you in their work or you can reference them when you put together the next proposal for the following client. Why would a project terminate early? A project would terminate early for various reasons. One of them could be that the project outcomes cannot be met, meaning that there's something that happened in the environment in which the project that you're busy working on, just the outcomes cannot be met. For instance, you are working on a product and halfway through the product you find out that the raw materials are contaminated and you cannot continue with bringing that product to market. Or the return on investment is very low and there's a high risk of the return not being met. So the client might look at it, or you might look at it and go, you know what, this project is not going to make us money. You will then have to approach the client and say, listen, either increase your budget or we will have to terminate our relationship. There could be a change in the company's financial situation, your client's financial situation. Your customer might be very dissatisfied with what you've done or dissatisfied with the service. Again, you should not wait for the client to come to you and tell them that they're not happy. You should know that through your interaction with them, regular meetings with them. You must monitor their customer satisfaction continually through the project. It should never come as a surprise to you if a customer don't want to continue working with you. The downside of an early termination is that it will potentially affect your reputation as a project team. It will also harm your brand as well. So in review, we've covered off quite a lot in this particular chapter. We've talked through clear project objectives, the scope document, the quality plan, the work breakdown structure, WBS, the responsibility matrix, and then we also touched on sequencing, which is network diagrams, network diagramming principles. We also talked through the actions that needs to happen when closing a project and the planning that needs to go into that process.